Good evening. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, a couple of Sunday nights ago, we started looking at the greatest argument that the atheist has against the existence of God, that being the argument of evil. We laid out the basic form of the argument is that, as you see here, God is all-powerful, God is wholly good, yet evil exists. The Bible teaches all of those, and so that seems to present a problem. However, for it to logically flow, the atheist has to insert a couple of other sub-premises. They have to claim, first of all, that there are no limits to what an all-powerful being can do. And we pointed out last time, if you remember, the flaw in that even an omnipotent God cannot make a free will being that is always going to choose what is right. They also have to assume that good is always opposed to evil in such a way that a good thing always eliminates evil as far as it can. We had noted in that regard, because, well, you have to remember, what is the only thing that is truly evil? We mentioned this. One thing and one thing only is sin, is the only thing that is truly evil. Has God opposed sin? Yes. Has God done something about sin? Yes. He sent His Son to remove sin. And so there's a problem. They claim that an all-powerful, holy good thing would eliminate evil completely. But because, as we noted, sin is the only thing that is intrinsically evil, well, that means, among other things, nothing natural is evil. That is, we cannot, as tragic as the earthquake that we've had recently over in Turkey, with the thousands upon thousands that have been killed, that itself is not evil. And I put that in quotation marks, because these are not evil in the intrinsic sense. But I'm talking about things like pain and suffering and death and loss and all of those things that the atheist will typically equate with evil. They're not true. They're not evil in the true sense. That is, they're not a corruption or a rejection of good. We do need to remember that in the face of these lesser evils, one can suffer and remain faithful. Instrumental evil, that is, ultimately the suffering produces results, but the suffering itself is not, strictly speaking, evil. Which way you go, suffering became more prominent. Death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Remember, what tree had God put there in the garden? The tree of knowledge of good and evil, but also the tree of life. What if mankind chooses to avoid the tree of knowledge of good and evil and just eats from the tree of life? Because he made the wrong choice. He rejected God, he sinned against God, and he suffered the consequences. The curses in the garden, which multiplied mankind, allow their children to receive injections. Here's the only conclusion I can exist. Or maybe, as Dan Barker has actually answered this objection for us, parents understand that sometimes the law of an injection or of setting a broken bone or of a surgery, that is, we have shown that neither the existence of evil, existence of pain is logically inconsistent with the God of the Bible. Many atheists have even sort of tacitly admitted as such, and so they retreat to a lesser argument based on probability. That is, given the amount of evil, given the amount of pain, the amount of suffering, the existence of the God of the Bible is less probable. Now, if I want to be technical and split hairs, they've now moved off of atheism. But remember, we just looked at Dan Barker's illustration about giving a child an injection. Does the child understand the point? But we will do it because there is a greater good. We're the baby. I know we don't like to think of ourselves that way. We like to think of ourselves as mature and rational, and we can understand. But in comparison to God, we're the baby, right? There is a lot we do not understand, cannot understand. And only God is in a position to understand all of the variables and all of the trade-offs and to know if there is a pain and if our opportunities, and we need to be familiar expression, no pain, no gain. Flip that around. No gain if there is no pain. Sometimes we've got to go through the hardships if we are treasures upon the earth. Why? What's going to happen to those treasures you lay up for yourselves on earth? The moth is going to consume them. The rust will consume. Thieves will break through and steal. Instead, rather than focusing your time and effort on those temporary things, do what? They're not going to. That's born very premature, maybe born without organs that are fully formed. Sons of God escape having cancer, being injured, or killed in an automobile accident, etc. In other words, if nothing bad ever happened to a Christian, do you think that might cause a lot more people to become Christians? For the wrong reasons, and therefore, I would argue, not truly Christians, but at least outwardly, they would adopt it. And by the way, where have I heard that argument before? Well, what argument did Satan make about the faithfulness of Job? Okay, yeah, sure, God, you got me there. Job is a faithful man, and he's a righteous man, and he's serving you, but let me tell you why. It's not because his heart's in it. It's not because he's a good person, and it's not because you're worthy of the existence of God. Any questions or comments? All right. I want to move on then, and obviously time won't allow us to get very far this evening. But I want us then to consider the second aspect, or beginning to consider the second aspect, and that is the inspiration of the Bible. See, when you think about the Bible, there are a few things that ought to stand out pretty quickly. One, it's not a new book. I mean, we call Matthew to Revelation the New Testament. How long has it been around? It's been around 2,000 years. I joke, it's like the new, if you're from Memphis, it's like the new bridge over I-55, or from I-55 across the river. How long has that thing been there? But it's still called the new bridge, even though it stopped being new a long time ago. The oldest parts of the Bible are copies of the Quran. On the earth right now, there are about 2.6 billion people who claim that this is the most influential book in their lives. That the book written by some uneducated people would receive that kind of following. It doesn't, assuming that the Bible is just an ordinary book. Now, after considering the Bible, I want to consider what we're arguing, that God does exist. And from that, we've argued that God is powerful because, well, the second question that we want to consider is, was the authoritative message of the Bible faithfully preserved? And that sort of breaks down into several other questions. That is, were the inspired books recognized and collected? That's what's referred to as canonization. Do we have the right books in the Bible? Has the text of those books been precisely preserved across the centuries? That's the study of transmission of the text. And then, for us, in practical benefit, has the text been accurately translated into modern languages? That is, when I pick up an English Bible, is it still faithfully representing what was originally written in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek? That question of translation. If each of these links is, depending on which translation you're reading from, 2 Timothy 3 and verse 16, the American Standard has, "For every scripture inspired of God is also profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for instruction, which is in righteousness." The term itself, inspiration, it only appears this one time, but the idea that God is behind the scriptures occurs thousands of times within the Bible. Think about we take Jeremiah as representative of the prophets. Jeremiah 1 and verse 9. "Then Jehovah put forth his hand and touched my mouth. And Jehovah said,
No.